If you've been involved in a program and you are not getting the results that you want, change programs. Don't wait. There is very important developmental windows that your child can really thrive through if you give them what they need. And it doesn't mean that where you've been hasn't been helpful, but sometimes we get on a hamster wheel and that hamster doesn't get anywhere. So step off and go another way.
I'm Rachel.
And I'm Jessica, and this is All Things Sensory by Harkla.
We are both certified occupational therapy assistants, and together with Harkla, we are on a mission to empower parents, therapists, and educators to help raise confident and strong children of all abilities.
On this podcast, we chat about all things sensory, diving into special needs, occupational therapy, parenting, self-care, overall health and wellness, and so much more.
We are here to provide raw, honest, and fun strategies, ideas, and information for parents, therapists, and educators, as well as other professionals to implement into daily life.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Before we jump into today's podcast episode, we do have a really fun, special, exciting announcement for you.
We have a free webinar coming up on August 19th at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. It's going to be live, so you're going to want to join us on the day of so that you can get all of the exciting freebies that we're going to share, and we'll do a live Q&A as well.
With this live webinar, we are going to teach you all about classroom strategies, sensory strategies. We're going to even touch on primitive reflex strategies, and bonus OTs, CODAs. You will also earn 0.2 AOTA CEUs, which means that you get 2 contact hours.
For free. This webinar is designed for parents, teachers, educators, therapists working in the school systems. Like Rachel said, we're going to give you sensory strategies and primitive reflex information as it relates to learning in the classroom.
We will put a link to sign up for this live webinar in our show notes, but just know that if you register and you can't make it or you have to leave early for any reason, you do get access to the recording.
We're really excited for this free live webinar, and we will see you there.
Okay, now we'll jump into today's episode. Hey there, welcome back to All Things Sensory by Harkla. We're so happy to have you here today. If you don't know, I'm Rachel.
And I'm Jessica.
We are the hosts, and we have an exciting interview. I say that every time.
Every time. It's unique, it's exciting, it's wonderful.
But they are.
It's always true.
Yes.
You're right. Today we're going to talk with Dr. Laura Hanson. I'm going to read her bio really quick. She has a lot of letters behind her name. Let me just throw that out there. I'm not going to read all of them. She even mentions this in the interview that she has a lot of credentials just because she has done a lot of education in her field. So Dr. Laura Hanson is a board-certified chiropractic pediatric diplomate and neurofeedback specialist. She's a neuro-developmental therapist, holds a master's in sports health science with a concentration in nutrition, and is a certified autism specialist. Dr. Hanson has held faculty positions at both Palmer College and Life University. Dr. Hanson is recognized domestically and internationally through her personal teachings to healthcare professionals, teachers, and parents on the progression of pediatric development. Dr. Hanson has practiced since 1996 in the area of pediatric development and brain-based patient management. Dr. Hanson is recognized as a world expert in teaching and caring for children with developmental delay. She's an educator. She has mentored other professionals. She's a parent. She's worked with hundreds of parents seeking to find a resolution for their child's chronic battle in health and development. She's amazing. She
is. You can tell she loves to learn. She loves to teach, and she loves to just share her passion for helping families and connecting their brains together.
Yep. She has her own podcast as well. We talk about that a little bit, but she has a lot of knowledge to share. So let's jump in.
Yep. Hello, Dr. Laura. Welcome to All Things Sensory podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you. We are going to ask you 5 secret questions. We start all of our interviews with secret questions that you don't know what's coming.
Okay.
The first one is, if you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
Oh, it's very simple. Jesus Christ.
Okay. Good answer. I love that. Okay. Perfect. All right, next question. What advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
So many things. I would say go after exactly what it is that you want to do and don't let anything limit you. The sky is the limit. Believe in yourself and don't look back.
I love that.
I love that advice for me right now.
Mm-hmm.
Next question. Would you rather live in Arizona or Alaska?
Oh, I'm going to pick Alaska because I like the cold weather.
You like the cold.
I love the cold.
Do you prefer coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Okay.
Good old coffee drinker.
Yeah.
Me too. Me too.
Same. Yep.
Last question. What is your sensory quirk?
My sensory quirk is I need to engage the whole process. And this is really what brought me to where I am today because I saw it in myself. When I was in chiropractic school, I had to sit in the front row. I wrote like a mad woman. I would go home. I would rewrite it. I would make charts with different colors. I would put it on flashcards. Back then was cassettes, so I'm really going to age myself. I would then do a cassette recording of the high points, and then I would exercise while I was listening to it. And I realized, oh my gosh, I am putting all this information in so many different files. And so when my brain needed an answer, it was literally going into these different circuits to gather the input so that I could take a test, do, some kind of live performance of cranial nerves or whatever. But I had to put it in all those files.
Wow. So if you didn't do that, did you just feel like you weren't retaining the information?
Yes, I did not feel confident. I did not feel confident.
Very kinesthetic learner.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, very much so.
It makes sense why you're a chiropractor then. Well, that leads us in. So tell us about yourself. Tell us about Connect My Brain. Fill our listeners in everything they need to know.
Well, I was actually going to be an attorney, and I set out in college and got a poli-sci degree from University of Georgia, and I was going to go to law school. And then in the process, my husband and I at the time found out we were having a baby. So I was not going to go to law school yet. And so I became a paralegal. And then I got to really see what the world of law was all about. And it wasn't for me. My husband was going to chiropractic school. So I decided I'll just go get a part-time job over there while he's finishing up. And 6 weeks later, I was enrolled in school, and I loved it. I was very physical. At this time, I had been a competitive bodybuilder.
What?
Yes, I Miss Music City of Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
I love weightlifting, so I'm just like, this is amazing.
And I taught aerobics for like 25 years. And so I was very physical, right? And so it really matched my personality. But because I had been a poli-sci person, I had to take all the sciences. And I said, okay, God, here's the deal. If I can take the 6-week courses of organic chemistry 1 and 2, physics 1 and 2, biology 2, if I could do that to where by the fall I could enroll so that I'm getting out by a certain time, I will take it that this is a path I need to follow. Well, I did all those sciences, and I was blown away with myself and my tactile learning. That's when it really started. And I would make flow charts, and everybody loved my flow charts. And they asked me, hey, can I get a copy? And this sometimes like a giant poster.
Oh, wow.
And so I actually made $5,000 selling my poster. And then they asked me to tutor organic chemistry. And I was going, I'm a nerd. Let's just face it. I am a nerd. So then I got into chiropractic school. I was president of my class all 4 years, and I graduated. started to go into a very traditional practice.
Mhm.
And then it was just flooded with children. And I don't feel like
Mm.
we get enough pediatrics in chiropractic school. So
Agreed.
I decided, I went to like my first annual conference and it was on pediatrics. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is just really great stuff. And so I enrolled in a program to become a diplomate in clinical chiropractic pediatrics. And that took about 3 years to complete. And then they asked me to teach neurology. Oh, yeah, that's an easy topic. So that's when it started to go to where I have 7 credentials after my name.
You do
Wow.
have a lot. I noticed
We did make that comment. We're like, man, there's a lot of
She
credentials.
has a lot of letters.
Well, when you tell somebody you're a chiropractor, they get a very limited framework.
True.
And I
Yes.
was just having this conversation with a family that's here, and I'm going, I don't really understand how it came to be because there is so much that we are taught. And, a lot of people don't even know that our curriculum even is more than what a traditional medical doctor gets as far as hours and different types of category. The things that we don't get, though, that I think we should is pharmacology, because so many people are on medications. And I think we should know more about that. But the journey has been fantastic. And I got very involved with kids. And then I started to get really focused on them. And then I had really incredible children that changed my whole direction. One little girl back from 1996, she would come in, and anytime she heard my voice, she would scream. And so I had to start whispering, and I couldn't touch her. I couldn't do an adjustment. I couldn't use an activator. I couldn't do anything. And of course, you're new in practice and you're going, okay, what do I do with this? Well, my office was always full of books. Nobody came in my office. So I'm back there and flipping through and trying to figure out, where do I go from here? And long story short, she really had some tactile sensitivities. She had some auditory processing confusion. And I began to learn what that really meant and really understanding how the nervous system gets wired up. It became much easier to begin to pinpoint. And then from there, I just kind of developed, the very first name was called Original Development. And I made Connect My Brain the adult part. And then too much to carry 2 names. So now everybody's Connect My Brain. But here it is a mechanical, chemical brain approach. It's a 3-tier approach. Everybody gets a brain map. The smallest we've done a brain map on is an 18-month-old baby, just to get an idea of what's going on in that brain. Most people, and I know you all probably approach it the same way, is that they have a tendency to not look at a child as a child. We look at it as, no, a child is trying to get wired up. And so you come into this world fully formed, but not fully functioning. And you've got to have this experience. And this experience is what's going to then fire up the brain. So we do brain mapping. We look at all of the developmental milestones, age-appropriate acquisition of jumping jacks, hopping on 1 foot. We use interactive metronome for measuring timing. We look at auditory. We look at visual motor, not ocular acuity, but visual motor. And we put these pieces together, and then I'll even make recommendations on lab work. So we're looking at that whole child. And trying, especially here in Atlanta, you don't want to drive around everywhere, but the more that you can put under one roof to help a family really saves some time. I too had my own personal journey with my daughter. So she's now 25, just turned 25. And when she was 16, she had a horrible car accident. And It was a full injury. It's a diffuse axonal injury, which is also like shaken baby. And the airbags deployed from the front and from the side and boxed her head. And so when the paramedics arrived, I'm sure you guys know the phrase of the Glasgow Coma Scale, but for your listeners, it goes from 3 to 15. And this is the way first responders try to talk to each other in an abbreviated form. And so 15 means that you have a mild traumatic brain injury, and 3 means that you're brain dead. My daughter was an 8 when they picked her up. Her hands and feet were curled in, but by the time she got to the hospital, she was a 4. She was dying. And she was on life support, and, looking at her, there's my baby laying there, and it was really traumatic. She was in a non-induced coma for about 12 days. She was in the hospital for 2 months. She had to relearn how to walk, talk, eat, toilet, dress herself. Now, back then, I'm a single mom. So back then it was me doing almost everything. And it was scary because at first they didn't think she'd live. And then they said, plan on long-term facility. And in my world, that's not an option. You're going to do everything you can possibly do. So I employed as many of my colleagues as I could. Everybody had some fantastic piece to add to the equation. But I closed my practice back then.
Oh, wow.
And it took us about 2.5 years, but she did come together. The same approach, mechanical, chemical brain. So of course you've got all the rehab that somebody with a traumatic brain injury is going to do. But when she was done with them, she had to come and work with me. And I even brought my equipment into the hospital. And so when they were done with her, now you're coming to work with me. You have to get that intensity. You have to get that frequency in order to make the brain go in the direction that you want it to go. We worked with a medical doctor. He's a great friend of mine. He's a functional doctor. He did all the chemistry. She had 8 bacteria after being in the hospital.
Oh my gosh.
Lots of work that we had to do, right? And then the brain. And so I have a wonderful colleague out in Johns Creek, Georgia. And I said, that's where you'll go for your neurofeedback. And so the same principles were applied, but I got to tell you, it was a really incredible journey, because now I knew what it really felt like for what my families are going through. And so from there, after she got through her rehab, she was accepted to the University of Georgia, and we both moved up to Athens because she was still in rehab. And you're not going to believe this, but she graduated magna cum laude.
It's amazing.
Wow.
And she is the most amazing person. She's completely independent. She drives again. I'd like to roll her in bubble wrap, but
Right.
but you can heal,
Mhm.
and that's the point. And even my son, who's 36, he had little quirks when he was in the 2nd grade. We had a great 2nd grade teacher who said, your son can't differentiate letter sounds.
Mhm.
First time anybody told me that. So of
Yeah.
course, I've had a lot of personal experience that then intrigued me. And then I feel like, my tagline is to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I feel like this is the territory that God's given me. And this is the way that I can plant seeds. He'll grow them. I just got to plant them. And so
Yes.
that's really who I am and my approach.
It's an amazing story.
So many layers, which I think is what makes professionals and practitioners so unique in their treatment approach. You mentioned a little bit about brain mapping. Tell us a little bit more about the brain mapping and what that is.
So you put a cap on the head, and a gold standard is to use a cap with 19 channels. And so these little leads are all over the cap. You put a gel into each of those holes. And what that's going to do is it's going to collect the electrical information coming off of the brain. And you do a recording. You're trying to get the person to be as still as possible. There's going to be an eyes closed and an eyes open. And then the raw data, you can actually see when there are too many slow waves. You can see when there's too many fast waves. And then generally you'll use a reporting service that'll kind of compile all that data into a report. And then the most important part of it is to match it to the person rather than trying to say, this is you, regardless if it matches you or not. So for example, classic patterns. Now, you don't really diagnose from a brain map. Again, you're trying to match, but classic patterns. So if you have too many slow waves like theta and alpha in your frontal lobe, you can't pay attention. There's no way you can pay attention.
Okay.
So instead of like just saying a child can't pay attention, why? Let's look at it and let's see if there's something we can do about it. If you have too much alpha on the right side, it creates anxiety. If you have too little beta on the left, it creates depression. So the idea is that this brain is actually feeding back into you. And are you familiar with Dr. Caroline Leaf?
Yes, I do know who she is. She has a podcast.
Well, and she's a neuroscientist. She is very, very smart.
Yeah, I don't remember what her book was, but her book is on my list of ones that I want to read.
It's Who Switched Off My Brain?
Yeah. Yeah.
The day of my daughter's accident, somebody was sitting doing neurofeedback, listening to her. And it was her work that helped me understand that it would take me about 2.5 years to get my daughter back to who she is. But she talked about how in the 1960s is when pharmaceuticals really came in to address emotional things like anxiety, depression, etc. And so people would say, to their provider, I have anxiety. Okay, here you go. And a prescription was written rather than asking why.
Yep.
Why do you have anxiety?
Yep.
It's one of our favorite questions.
Because there's got to be a reason. And sometimes I think we've taken away just that simple part that life has situations that go on. They're not easy. They make life hard sometimes. But when you can embrace that situation and empower that person, and that's what I have found with brain mapping and neurofeedback. You do a lot of things with the body. There's OT, there's PT, there's speech, there's all kinds of different physical therapies out there. Even people that look at chiropractic for pain. Okay. I'll always ask, how many years has this person been in pain? There's patterns that get set up in the brain. And if you don't change the pattern in the brain, it's very difficult to change the pattern in the body.
Well, I think it's interesting that you brought up the pharmaceutical story because that is kind of the approach right now is, okay, you feel depressed. Well, here's an antidepressant that may or may not work for you. It's kind of like just throwing darts in the dark of like, this might work for you, but it might not. Let's just try it and see what happens instead of taking a different approach and saying, well, maybe we should look at your brain. Maybe we should look at your lifestyle, maybe
your blood work,
and find the underlying cause for the depression or the anxiety, and then create an individualized treatment plan that is more likely to help you in the long run.
Couldn't agree more. If our healthcare system really approached each individual person and give them what they need, I just think the outcomes would be totally different.
Yeah, agreed. Because I think too, when we look at the brain waves, somebody's anxiety might be different in the brain than another person's anxiety, which means that the same pharmaceutical is not going to work for both of them.
Right. And then there's some interesting genetic mutations that also play a huge part in how medications are going to work. I myself love looking at the MTHFR and the COMT. And, when I started looking at that like 15 years ago, my first response was, why are we not looking at every person in an institution and testing this? Because it is the easiest pathway to support. Now, I don't know 100% if it would be easy for every individual, but wouldn't it be great if we tried?
Yes,
it would.
Who was it that we interviewed about the gene mutations?
Dr. Haley.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah. And talking about the connection between the sensory system and those mutations as well.
Yes.
And detoxing,
Low cholesterol has a lot to do with sensory issues.
Oh, interesting. I haven't heard that before.
So your liver makes 80% of your cholesterol. Cholesterol is going to be utilized for your stress hormones, your reproductive hormones, and your neurotransmitters. So when we look at these little beings and they're not moving along the continuum as expected, we know they're in stress, whether they can verbalize it or not. So if we're using all of our cholesterol to just run the stress cycle through our body, and you're more prevalent to do that because you're closer to the beginning of time, and you can go back into that moro reflex very easily, which has everything to do with the sympathetic nervous system. So you're going to fly through your cholesterol. And now as you're trying to build those higher centers, like for language, you don't have the raw material to build it. And so then all of a sudden you got language delays, you got motor delays, you got speech delays. And that's one of the elements. That's why I think we have to look at all of the pieces.
I love that. I'm going to look more into that because that's really fascinating.
If you go on I'll send you the link. They've got Great Plains Laboratory old library of resources. They have unbelievable recordings on low cholesterol and depression, low cholesterol and autism. In fact, probably 20 years ago, NIH was doing a call for papers if anybody had any ideas on autism. And I actually submitted one for low cholesterol. So did the University of Ohio. People were already looking at this. So the webinars on there are like 2 hours long, but they're great information.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we can include the link to that in the podcast show notes as well.
It's actually New Beginnings Nutritionals. That's what it is. They're very sensory population driven. So they have lots of specialty products for that population.
Perfect.
Yes.
Got it.
Awesome. Did you have a question?
Yes, I did.
Did you lose it?
Yes. No, I have it. So you mentioned the moro reflex. We are big reflex nerds. We love reflexes. Tell us more about how you got started with reflexes, like how you learned about them, how you include reflex integration in your practice.
Well, it's probably my favorite part of something that I learned. And it's because they gave me that charge to teach neurology. And I didn't want to be like vestibular cochlear nerve. Goes from your vestibular to your cochlear. I wanted to have a little pizzazz. Found a program through the Institute of Neurophysiological Psychiatry in Chester, England. They were having their first class in the United States, and I was in it. And it was just me, a functional pediatric optometrist, and a perceptual therapist. We were the only 3 people there. And we had a wonderful woman at Victoria, who was our teacher. And so it took about 18 months to go through the entire program. But it was such an eye-opener that so much of this information was really already known. And I felt almost like behind the 8 ball learning, my gosh, this should be part of every pediatric class. And so the first thing that I learned was about the withdrawal reflexes first. And then we went into the primitives. And then postural, and then, of course, how do you test, integrate, etc. Well, the moro, almost every kid on the planet has a moro. And so I was always trying to show parents oh, did you see how your kid just startled? And, the parent's like, I don't really know what she's talking about. So just my mind, I'm like, I have to find a way to quantify this. And that's actually what led me into neurofeedback. So a wonderful man in my profession had developed a stress response test. And so you get wired up with lots of wires, and you go through 4 different challenges. And then you have a recovery after each one. And you're watching what happens to the autonomic nervous system. And so Moro is arousal, CO2, O2 reflex, and the sympathetic system. So I can correlate heart rate variability, respiration, pulse oximetry, what's going on in the brain during those different types of stressor. And then it would come back and tell you what is going on in that autonomic nervous system. And so that was a way to begin to quantify rather than just trying to make a kid have a startle response. And so that's really one of the biggest heartbeats of this program. And you learn that in neurofeedback too, that if you're going to change the brain, you've got to change either the under-aroused pattern or the over-aroused pattern. So you got to change freeze response or fear paralysis, or you've got to change that over fight or flight type of reaction. And I'm sure you've seen that too. I've had kids in here that it was perfectly obvious they were in a fight or flight. Lots of times they might even try to run out the front door. Might have another kid that you can barely get him to, pick up his arm. So I think the reflexes are a very important part, especially in pediatrics. But here's the other understanding. It's kind of like a bell curve. So we come into this world doing this, and it's actually thought that your last breath is you going back in tomorrow.
Oh,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you think about when a baby is born, it's that Moro that's like that first breath.
First breath.
So I mean, that makes sense. Yeah.
It's the training of heart rate variability. So we're going to have a quick response and then a very slow recovery. That's what heart rate variability is. It is that inhale, push, and slow exhale.
It's so fascinating to us too. One topic we haven't talked a ton about is heart rate variability. So for our listeners who maybe aren't sure what that is, could you give us a little explanation in your terms?
Well, heart rate variability is gold standard for cardiac health. Okay. And what it means is you're going to take a breath, and then there's going to be a certain number of heartbeats within that breath. So let's think of a cycle of breath. We go up, our heart rate goes up when we inhale, and our heart rate goes down when we exhale. And then there are heartbeats. So let's say we're looking at 5 or 6 different breath cycles. Let's say the first one, you have 8 heartbeats. The next one, you have 12. The next one, you have 6. The next one, you have 16. What that means is there's a lot of variance going on. So that means if you get something that raises your heart rate up to 6 beats in a breath cycle, you got it. If it goes up to 12, you got it. If it goes up to 16, you got it. So you're able to handle different stressors with different levels of intensity, and your autonomic nervous system is going to recover. With other people, they may not have that standard within them. And it may, let's say it goes 888. It's almost like a metronome. And they've got one level, that's all they got. So no matter what intensity is going on, that's driving their response. And most of the time, that's just a really heightened stress response and a lot of imbalance in the nervous system in general.
So in your practice, do you work on heart rate variability? Do you help them? How do you help your clients improve their variability?
Biofeedback and neurofeedback. So after brain mapping, you decide if you're coming here after we do our whole assessment, but everybody gets breathing training. There is so much power behind a regulated breath. So they'll wear a respiration belt around their bellies. They'll have a heart rate monitor on their finger. They're watching a program and they have to mirror image what they see through their own breath. Most of the time, people are breathing up here in the upper part of their lungs. They don't know how to get into that diaphragmatic breath. And that diaphragmatic breath, meaning that your diaphragm will literally push down with your inhale, and it will stimulate the vagus nerve, which is on the back side, which will then go and trigger resetting every organ in the body. So lots of times we have to help the little ones, and I'll put my hands around their belly. And as the ball is going up, it looks like it's going up a slide. I'll go ahead and take a deep breath in and breathe into my hands. So now I'm giving them tactile, I'm giving them pressure so that they can find it. And then repetition and practice, they're going to get it. The cool part is there's still little monitors right on the screen that when you get in that appropriate response, this cute little guy comes out animated and exercises with you. So we can also tie it to focus and go, how many times did he come out and exercise with you? Now we have a child that's engaged in the process. And that's really what it's about. You know, with neurofeedback, that means that you're doing that kind of training on the brain. So they sit there, they may have a cap, they may have some single leads. They're watching something that they enjoy, no fantasy, nothing violent. And they are training through the eyes of their conscious mind, but their subconscious mind is picking up the pattern. And you put filters over what they're watching. And when their brain is in the right place, it goes very bright. When their brain is not in the right place, it goes dark. So that's the visual. And then there's an auditory sound as well.
Amazing. I love that. So you really have a lot in your clinic that you're doing specific for each child and each adult based on what they need.
Yep. Every kid comes in. Every kid starts with aerobics. They learn their target heart rate. We're working on that hippocampus. We do neurological stacking. They're watching a monitor that looks like they're out on a trail. They are wearing brain-based music if it needs to be in one ear over the other so that we can lateralize correctly. If we need to shift the dominance of the eye, they might be wearing eye lights. So as many neurological pieces as we can put on, that's what we're going to do. We have an array of body class exercises where they go from Fantastic 7 to body weight 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we use interactive metronome. We do neurofeedback, and we do a lot for visual motor because your eyes are the only piece of neurology that's on the outside of your skull. And so that information that you pull in is going to the visual cortex in the back of the brain. So what you see influences your entire brain, and it becomes your perception. So it's not visual acuity for clarity, it's visual motor for pulling that system together. I love the eyes too.
So do we.
Oh my gosh, you have so many amazing. I want to come.
I was just thinking that too. I'm like, can I come? Can I tour? Can you? It's so fascinating.
We have another great show. We could do a live thing. It could be a lot of fun.
I'd bring my son and you could run him through all the things.
Yeah.
Do you just have the one practice or are you expanding in any way? Do you do virtual?
I do a lot of virtual. Yes, I do a lot of virtual. And we're really building that platform. The podcast that I have, it's starting to really, cross the globe. I had a man reach out to me from England. His daughter has CP. And he heard the one on moral reflex, and he was telling me how her startle is so high. Is there anything we can do now? I mean, that touches my heart so much that, first of all, somebody's heard this over in another place.
That is the most amazing thing about podcasts, I think, right now, is that you can reach people everywhere.
Right? Yes. So we really are. We're trying to build a greater virtual presence. And I rent out neurofeedback equipment. I have families come in for intensives. I train them on how to use it. And then we get them all set up. And then I'm meeting with them once a week so that they're telling me, how things are going, and I'm looking at the numbers. But it's an opportunity. I do share a little bit of affiliation with another, a completely different type of a clinic. They needed some help in their neurofeedback department, so I'm helping them out. But I do only have one office right now. It has always been my dream to expand and have doctors that wanted to learn this and take it around. But that hasn't happened, and it would have been great if it had.
You talked about having families come in for intensives, and then they meet with you once a week. And that's actually one of Rachel and I's future dreams, is to do intensives with our clients, because right now the OT model is very much like you come in once a week for life. You know what I mean? And we just don't feel like that makes sense. And so doing some sort of program where you individualize the treatment, you do it an intensive with them, and then you provide them with everything they need to be able to do at home. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing.
Exactly. And so, the brain is going to change when there is an intensive going on. So think about it like an action potential. You can't move a muscle unless that threshold goes up and you reach action potential to make it go. So the same thing is true with trying to change the brain. You've got to put the intensity and frequency into it. So when people come here, they're seen twice a day for 5 days. Last week was an amazing experience with a 3.5-year-old that's already been labeled autistic. And I'm not a labeler. I'm not going to label people. I'm going to look at the history. Does it all match what is happening to this child? And then let's go to work. Okay. He's 3.5. The changes that we made were phenomenal. He was cooperating. He was trying to make sounds. He was trying to use words. He was now taking initiative, jumping on the trampoline. We were doing neurofeedback with him. We're changing the diet. We're working on the gut. And by the end, she just sent me a picture yesterday. He's literally looking directly at her. So that mirror neuron is firing. And if you keep this intensity up, it is going to go. Now, there's going to be cases that it might be better that you do 2 weeks. I find that most people can't really give up 2 weeks of their life to travel in to do something. Yeah. So the most common pattern here is 5 days, but boy, we use it. So you're in here twice a day. We are working on things all the time. We're still seeing our other patients as well. So there's a lot of activity that goes on, but it does make a difference. And then, yes, whatever plan you want to make, you send it home with them. And then you go into like a coaching and you check in on them once a week and see how things are going.
Okay, so you do usually a week intensive, and then how long are you working with them generally on that coaching model?
It really depends. That part's not a contract. You can stay on that coaching for as long as you feel like you need me. And I think that makes parents feel like, okay, as soon as I get some of this, I could maybe take a little break, keep working on things, and then you can always step back into it if you need to. If you're doing neurofeedback, the traditional program is about 40 sessions. But when these people rent the equipment and take it home with them, you could do neurofeedback every day, and you would be getting in 3 or 4 months, you'd be getting a lot of neurofeedback done. And people then come in about halfway point. We do another brain map and that type of thing. I really try to look at that individual and make a personal recommendation rather than having just, this is, my finite plan. This is what I do regardless. Now, I will say one other thing on behalf of us as providers. I did learn something this summer, that if you make a plan, you assess the person and you decide this is what this person needs in order for you to get the kind of results that you can get. When you have somebody come in and start to say, well, I'll do this, but I'm not doing this or this. I'm going to share with you girls, I'm actually, I'm older than you, but I'm going to share that wisdom with you. Look at it as it's not the right fit. In the long run, it won't be okay for them. And in your long run, it won't be okay for you. And I'm going to tell you to really hold on to what you believe is really needed and stand with that.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice because, I'm sure you feel the same way. We want to help everyone. And so when someone comes to us and they say that, like, we want to say, okay, we'll do what you want, but you're right. In the long run, it probably isn't going to align and there's going to be conflict. And then we as practitioners will be frustrated that we're not able to help them as much as we want to be able to.
This is my 30th year of practice.
Wow.
This has taken a long time. And I like the other thing that you brought up about conflict, because that does come up. And I'm now, another lesson that I learned this summer, I now am asking my new families, okay, so when we don't agree on something and there's conflict, how are we going to handle it? Have that conversation up front, because in the beginning, there's all kinds of different emotions going on and things are always bound to happen. And let's just be professional and adult about it and just say, what works for you, what works for you, and agree upon that. I think it's very important because, I have put my absolute blood, sweat, and tears into this practice. And it means everything to me. And helping children means everything to me.
So then what would you say is one of the biggest challenges with what you do?
Oh, trying to get the diet to change. That's the number one.
Yep, that does not surprise me.
I remember one time this lady came in, paid for an assessment, put her child through the assessment, and then came back and said, if Dr. Hanson's going to tell me that I can't give my kid sugar, I can't do it. And that was probably back in 2019, but it really sticks with me. Food is the hardest part.
Yeah. Food is connected to so many things in our lives, our emotions, our daily experiences, and holidays, and
It's very social.
And it's so many food properties are so addictive that we just get stuck.
My biggest thing too, my husband gives me a hard time about foods and stuff because we're gluten-free and like very, dye-free. That's a big one because my kids are starting to realize what happens when they have food dye. And my husband just sometimes gets on me if someone offers my kids food or something and I'm like, oh yeah, let me just check real quick, make sure there's no food. I want to teach my kids to advocate for their needs and to say, you know what, I'm going to pass because it just kind of makes me feel a little bit crazy or it just doesn't sit right with me. And I want my kids to learn how food makes them feel and how those things connect to them and to not be ashamed to say, no, thank you, or that's okay. And I'm trying to have that conversation because he knows what happens when they have food dye or they have gluten or all the things. But
socially, it seems weird.
Yes,
right?
It's definitely hard to be able to say, nope, I'm good. Like that, that just doesn't sit right with us. We just don't feel great when we have that. So teaching kids to also be able to advocate for their needs is huge and to help them realize.
My daughter has said to me numerous times, I am so glad that you're my mother and you taught me the way that you did. And my son, he may not come out and say it specifically, but you can see his lifestyle. his lifestyle. He has supplements, he exercises, he knows how to have work-life balance. So those are the things. You will get those rewards and you don't give up.
Thank you.
There you
I
go.
won't. Daniel, are you listening to this?
Yeah, you're going to send him this episode.
He doesn't listen to these. Who we kidding?
You're just going to send it to him.
I know.
As we're kind of starting to wrap up a little bit, do you have a piece of advice, like your gold star piece of advice that you can give to our listeners? And our listeners are a mixture of therapists, parents, educators, other professionals.
Well, be a couple. So to the parents, if you've been involved in a program and you are not getting the results that you want, change programs. Don't wait. There is very important developmental windows that your child can really thrive through if you give them what they need. And it doesn't mean that where you've been hasn't been helpful, but sometimes we get on a hamster wheel and that hamster doesn't get anywhere. So step off and go another way. Therapists, professionals, learn, open your mind, keep your minds open, ask questions, read, learn everything you can. And especially if there's an area like my whole trajectory started with the vestibular system. I love that system. And I dove into that and it just, opened up everything. So I think it's just about keeping our minds open and receiving new information. I mean, every day is something new.
I love that.
Those are great pieces of advice. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I feel like mission accomplished. We have learned from you. We have grown with you. This has been so wonderful. I just can't thank you enough for being here.
I'm really grateful too, because it seems like we're very like-minded women.
I think so.
Yes.
Look what we're doing, like what you said with our podcasts getting out there. When the CDC changed the developmental milestones, I got very frustrated.
So frustrated.
I was going to ask you about that. I forgot. Yes. I was going to ask you what your
Yes.
What was your thought when they removed crawling?
I was furious because we are normalizing developmental delay. So I made an app. It's called Connect My Brain. Everything about me is called Connect My Brain. You can go right on it, whatever age your child is, tap on it and see the things that the child should be doing. And this is, I really do hope you guys come down here to get this information out there and help more children, more families, more professionals. And that's really my passion.
I honestly would love to.
Thank you so much. It's been so much fun meeting both of you and spending this time with you.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Laura.
you. We'll chat soon. What a fantastic interview that was. I told you, we warned you. She is so knowledgeable, so fun. The beautiful thing about these podcasts is we just get to meet so many amazing like-minded professionals who are in it for truly helping kids thrive.
Yes.
It's awesome.
I'm ready to do our podcast tour, go to all these places, meet all these professionals in real life. But really, truly, she was amazing. She shared so much. She has more to share on her podcast, on her website. Everything will be linked so that you can learn more from her, reach out to her, let her know that you listened to her on the All Things Sensory podcast.
And one thing that we ask of you, if you could take a minute and leave a review on iTunes or Spotify, we really appreciate when you do that for our guests because, it's always nerve-wracking coming on someone else's podcast. So take a minute, leave a review, let us know your thoughts, and then take a screenshot while you're watching this on video, if you're not already, and tag us on social media, tag Dr. Laura, and we would love to just see that you're watching this or listening and hanging out with us.
Yep. And like Rachel said, we're on video now, so you can watch us on YouTube. And I think that's it.
That's it. We'll plan on seeing you next week.
Okay, bye.
Thank you so much for listening to All Things Sensory by Herkla.
If you want more information on anything mentioned in the show, head over to harkla.co/podcast to get the show notes.
If you have any follow-up questions, the best place to ask those is in the comments on the show notes or message us on our Instagram account, which is at harkla_family or at All Things Sensory Podcast. If you just search Harkla, you'll find us there.
Like we mentioned before, our podcast listeners get 10% off their first order at Harkla. Whether it's for one of our digital courses or one of our sensory swings, the discount code SENSORY will get you 10% off. That's SENSORY.
Head to harkla.co/sensory to use that discount code right now.
We are so excited to work together to help create confident kids all over the world. While we make every effort to share correct information, we're still learning.
We will double check all of our facts, but realize that medicine is a constantly changing science and art.
One doctor or therapist may have a different way of doing things from another.
We are simply presenting our views and opinions on how to address common sensory challenges, health-related difficulties, and what we have found to be beneficial that will be as evidence-based as possible.
By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice to treat any medical condition in either yourself or your child.
Consult your child's pediatrician or therapist for any medical issues that he or she may be having.
This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast.
Thanks so much for listening.